Hearing your grandmother's terrifying childhood trauma, working on haunted military land, or seeing something in the distance that defies the laws of nature. This is just the normal stuff we deal with around here, and it happens to be a part of these 6 allegedly true scary stories today. Enjoy these creepy tales, and be sure to give your grandma a kiss, because that poor lady has seen some crap. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. Now, let's begin. Three stories from working around a military base. From RJB. I work in and on the surrounding woods of an army base, and I've got some experiences you might be interested in. The forest is mostly made up of pine trees, and there's also replicated villages where the soldiers train scattered throughout. Some of them are over 35 miles out, and most of the roads are gravel or dirt. These are 3 of the scariest things that have happened to me. The Ghost in Youngstown. I was working in one of the villages about 25 miles from the base. My coworker Donald was telling me about an employee from the company I work for, who had apparently ended himself in one of the buildings by hanging himself from a ceiling fan. The building was made to look like a clinic complete with hospital beds and a reception desk. As soon as I walked into that building the first time, I felt something. It didn't feel malicious or evil, but something about it was wrong. I wasn't scared at first, but I was very uncomfortable. My anxiety quickly rose, and I began to feel depressed even. I wanted to leave, but I had work to do. But I had to go ahead and finish the work order. I had to replace 3 of the doors there. The first 2 work orders were in the back of the clinic, but the third was the door to the entrance of the hanging room, as my coworkers called it. The second my foot crossed the threshold of that room, my uneasiness worsened. Come on, man. It'll only take 7 minutes at the most, I reminded myself. Did you say something? Donald asked as he entered the clinic to check on my progress. It was nothing, I replied. I'm sure he noticed my troubled behavior, but he didn't mention it. All right, come help me when you're finished, he quipped before walking out of the door. He seemed unaffected by the aura in the room. I lit a cigarette, and I started to install the doorknob. It was a tight fit, and I ended up having to hammer it in with a rubber mallet. As I reached for the other knob, I heard the distinct sound of rattling metal hitting the floor. What the heck? I said aloud. There was no way the knob fell by itself. I felt my anxiety reaching its peak. I could feel eyes on me. I was alone, yet someone was there with me. Hello? Anyone there? I whimpered out. Then I stood up, facing towards the ceiling fan. My nose started burning from the smoke coming from my cigarette, still perched between my lips. I took a long drag. The sound of approaching footsteps in front of me caught my attention. I looked up at the fan and breathed out. When I did, the smoke seemed to spread out drastically about 6 inches in front of my face, as if there was someone's face in front of me that I could not see. I could almost see the smoke revealing facial features. I think he's still there, the man who took his own life. He's trapped. His pain and sorrow still linger in the clinic. Sometimes they follow. A very large number of people say that they've seen strange things or creatures, or have been followed through the woods by something they cannot see around here. I'll say I've only caught glimpses of this creature or creatures, or have found evidence of them lurking in the woods. At first, I thought it was just one, but as time has passed, I'm beginning to believe there are perhaps more than one of them. The first piece of evidence came in the form of a footprint. I found it in a village called Jetertown. There was only one. It was in a patch of mud. The first thing I noticed was it was big around 16 inches. Then I noticed that there were 6 digits, and there was even webbing between the toes. I asked my coworker about this, and he said he saw them on occasion, and that I should expect the same. The second piece of evidence came in the form of 2 carcasses, or at least what was left of them. We were on a gravel road, and we were coming to a low water crossing when we noticed something at the edge of the water. We pulled up to the crossing and got a morbid surprise. All over the road were shredded pieces of what was once a deer and a wild hog. The deer's innards were on the ground. The head was gone. The hog's head was gone too, as well as its limbs. It was a mess. It didn't look like the work of a starving animal, but more like the work of an animal who wanted to slaughter something. The final proof I received was the first sighting I had. Whatever it wasn't natural. My coworker Justin and I were in a village called Carnus, replacing a set of steps to the imitation police station. I had just cut a board for one of the steps when we both heard what sounded like a voice calling for help. "Hey, did you hear that?" Justin asked. "Yeah," I replied. We stopped what we were doing and listened. "Help me." A voice came from behind the tree line. Something wasn't right about this voice, though. It sounded like "help me" was being repeated on loop. It was filled with static as if it was being spoken through a speaker from a radio. "Let's go find out where that's coming from," Justin said. "That's a bad idea, Justin. Something doesn't seem right about this," I retorted. "Help me." The voice came again, the same tone and same pitch, except it was far closer. We both froze. It came from behind a large red oak tree less than 10 yards away. It wasn't much longer before we actually saw it. The thing peeking around the tree, staring at us. It looked like a hairless lemur, but it was bigger, about 4 feet tall, and it had these long fangs protruding from the bottom jaw. Its skin looked like it was charred. It was black and seemed to be falling off in places. Justin, do you see this?" "Yeah, I see it," he said. The creature opened its mouth and released a sound like a child laughing. It stepped out from behind the tree and dropped to all fours, its disgusting, rotting tail whipping back and forth. "Get in the truck, now. Come on, Justin." It ran at us at an unnatural speed. We ran for the truck and got in, locking it right as the creature began to claw at the side of the truck. We started it and drove away as the thing continued to follow the truck, but we eventually lost it. We hauled tail out of there. I've seen those things since, but only at a distance. I don't know what it is, but it's aggressive and very obviously dangerous. Stairway to Oblivion. This is perhaps the most unnerving thing I've seen since I started the job. If you've read I Am a Search and Rescue Officer from the subreddit No Sleep on Reddit, then you've probably heard of the stairs. I can confirm that crap like that happens out in these woods, but it makes more sense out here, as fake buildings come and go for the Army's purposes, but they're still quite creepy. The first sets of them come at least 15 or so miles into the woods. Some are dilapidated and in ruins, but some look brand new and are complete with carpet. Those are the ones that don't make any sense, because there's never any dirt or debris on them, and as you walk closer to these brand new looking ones, the forest around you will go quiet. It's less like they just happen to be in a remote part of the forest, but more like the wildlife avoids them entirely. The first time I saw them, I didn't know what to think. I was actually on my way home from work. When I go home from my job, I take a route through the woods. I travel down gravel roads and dirt trails to get home. I was driving down a trail when a deer ran out in front of me. I managed to swerve around it, but I ended up bottoming out in the ditch. I cursed to myself. I looked up to see that deer standing at the edge of the trail staring at me. I thought it was strange, but where I work, deer hunting is prohibited, so the deer don't really care about people. I got out of my truck to check for any damages. Luckily, the damage was minimum. I called a friend to pull my truck out, and I noticed a structure about 100 yards into the thicket. I only noticed the top of it at first, but as I drew closer, I began to realize what it was. The heck is this doing out here? I wondered. I've never noticed it before, and as far as I knew, there had never been any fake villages or towns here. I stood about 50 yards away from the staircase. It consisted of 12 steps with beige siding and red carpet running up the steps. It was pristine, as if it was just built that day. As I stood there, awestruck, I began to feel anxiety all over me. However, I moved closer. Somehow I was compelled to move towards it, like it was telling me to come closer. I stopped 10 feet away from it and noticed something weird. It was quiet, dead silent. My anxiety began to skyrocket. I felt like I shouldn't be there. I stepped a little closer and reached my hand out to touch it. I didn't want to, but I felt like I had to, or something bad would happen. I tried to move, but my legs and feet would not respond. Then I heard a voice yelling my name from the trail behind me. It was the friend that I had called. My name being called was just enough to snap me out of that trance. I trudged back through the thicket and exited the tree line. My friend had a look of relief on his face. "The heck were you, dude?" he asked. "I've been calling you for 20 minutes straight now." "What do you mean?" I replied. "I couldn't have been gone for more than 7 minutes tops. Besides, there's this weird staircase out there in the middle of the woods. You should see it." He followed me back to where the stairs were, but it was clear. There was nothing where the stairs once were. It was as if it was never there, just a small clearing with colorful flowers scattered throughout the area, but no stairs. "Come on, man," my friend said as he patted me on the back. "Let's get your truck moving and get out of here." I was confused. Did I imagine that whole thing? It seemed so real. I would get my answer a few weeks later when a coworker and I found a set on a different trail, another set of stairs. I asked him about it then, and he said that he didn't really know much about them, except that other people have seen them. They've been seeing them for as long as they could remember, before the army base was even here. It's this sort of unexplained strangeness that's the scariest to me. Because what does it mean? Big Sky from PixieStyx. It was the 90s. I was in my early 30s, residing in a large city in Ontario, Canada. Being a small-town girl at heart, there were times I missed space, fresh air, and quiet. I was dating a fella from northwestern Ontario at the time. He lived on a First Nations reserve near the Manitoba border. Although it was a long-distance relationship, we made the effort to visit one another as much as possible. As I was casually employed at the time, my schedule was more flexible than his. So, quite often I would take the overnight bus ride to his place, which took me up and over beautiful country around 2 Great Lakes. Quite an adventure in itself, and a usually very pretty trip. Part of my visits usually entailed trips over the border to Winnipeg to visit my beau's aunts and cousins. It was during one of these jaunts that I had an adventure of another kind. I should point out that I was around and in the Ojibwa Nation. It's a wonderful way of life and people. Part of my experience entailed listening to loads of interesting stories, as it's largely an oral tradition and a living history. A lot of the stories involved topics and situations of a paranormal nature, something that I had a very open mind to, and I find it intriguing. Although I must admit that perhaps I thought most of the stories were allegorical, some sort of moral lesson or cautionary tale that was never supposed to be taken literally. It was on a bright and sunny weekday when my boyfriend and I, along with his sister, were driving back from Winnipeg. The sky looked like the typical big sky look that the prairies are known for. Huge blue sky, and very little, if any, clouds. There was hardly any traffic on the road. I remember the band Guess Who was playing on the radio, and there was a lull in our conversation. I was looking up at the tops of trees, searching for eagles, and was feeling very relaxed. I noticed one huge pine tree off by itself, and beside it, about 10 or 15 feet from the ground, was this white, egg-shaped thing just hovering by the tree. If I were to estimate a size of this thing, it would be maybe 20 to 25 feet across. It just floated there, a perfect elliptical shape. It was off-white in color, sort of glinting like a pearl or opal. All of us were silently looking at it, not really saying a word. If that wasn't strange enough, it got stranger. It was like we became frozen. The car seemed to freeze in place. Time stopped around us, and there was no sound except for this weird industrial hum, like a cross between a cicada buzzing and the grind of a circular saw, as heard from a distance. Then, poof, the thing disappeared from view in the blink of an eye. Then there was a jolt of the car. The radio came back on, and all at once we collectively shouted, "What was that?" I also got a splitting headache soon after. There was talk about lights in the sky and general weirdness. I distinctly remember my boyfriend stating, "We're told those things really like being near water." Very fitting, considering we were in Lake of the Woods territory. It's interesting to note that very near where we had our experience, one well-known Canadian UFO case occurred, the Falcon Lake incident from the 1960s. I overheard my grandmother's story. From Anonymous. Some time ago, I overheard my grandmother talking to my aunts. She was telling them about her experience when she went to visit her sister in the next town over. At the time, I had my headphones in, but I played the music really low so I could still hear my surroundings. My grandma is a religious person. She's wise, kind, and would be considered a witch doctor, or locally known as a bobohizan in the olden days. She doesn't sprout bullcrap, and this is why I believe her story. So here's what I overheard. I have a great aunt living in a town about 3 hours away from my own hometown. A few years back, my grandmother went to visit my great aunt and stayed for a couple of days. My great aunt owns a 2-story house where the ground floor is just a large parking area, and living areas are on the first floor. When she first arrived during the day, everything was normal. She spent some quality time with her sister and had a good time overall. But when it was starting to get dark, they began closing all the windows and curtains and the doors super tight. After that, they went about their business as usual. So my grandmother was in the kitchen with my great aunt and my aunties. They were preparing for dinner when they heard clucking outside. It sounded a lot like a chicken, but more human. It was hovering at least 16 feet in the air, and from how my grandmother tells it, they weren't surprised to hear this. She called it the most unpleasant feeling she has ever experienced. The clucking was circling the house, going from window to window, door to window, trying to find a way inside the house. My grandmother mentioned that it was trying to smell the newcomer, which was my grandma at the time, so that's why it was circling the place. She said if you looked really closely between the gaps of the curtains, you'll see a head floating with its entrails blowing in the air. She stopped talking when she noticed I was listening. I didn't know what happened next, but I remembered a similar story I overheard her whispering to my aunts when I was little. This happened when she was newly married, pregnant with her first child. They were having dinner when the roof just collapsed and a headless man fell from the ceiling, bleeding from the neck. As with the previous story, I don't know what happens after, because my grandmother seems reluctant to let us kids know about it. But what I can tell you is the name of this creature. It is called the Penangal, but better known as Balan Balan here in my hometown. I have heard people talking about this particular creature long before I was exposed to the internet, but a lot of the people I know seem reluctant to even say its name out loud. They say it makes them stronger. I did some research on the internet recently and found that a lot of what was whispered there in my hometown matches with what I found online, though some information seems to be missing. What did we encounter? From Corvid. There's a trail in my town that I've been walking on with my family for as long as I can remember, but I guess not a lot of people have heard about it. Often when I bring it up with friends, they don't know what I'm talking about. It's not a very big trail, just a small loop that I can't imagine is even a mile long. You can actually see it from the freeway, so I'm honestly surprised that more of my friends don't know about it. But I digress. In recent years, my sister and I have been taking walks on this trail on our own, and I can happily report that most of the time there's nothing odd about the experience. However, there have been a few weird incidents. The first one I can remember was the time we both suddenly got a strange sense that something was wrong on the trail. I don't mean like we thought we were in any danger. It just suddenly felt wrong. More like we both thought it looked and felt like we weren't in the right spot at all. It had been a while since we had walked the trail when this happened, so normally I'd actually just chalk this up as a case of us not knowing the trail as well as we thought. Except that this has happened again more than once since. It feels like every other time we go for a walk here, we get about halfway through the loop when we suddenly get this sense of being lost. But the incident that still really baffles me to this day, the two of us swear we saw something alive on the trail. The first sighting happened when we sat down on the bench to eat the snack lunches we had packed. Everything was perfectly normal, until my sister suddenly jumped up like a bug had been crawling on her. I really did assume that that's what happened, until she actually told me what made her jump, which didn't happen until after my own sighting. Mine was closer to the end of the loop, and we were deciding whether or not to go around again, because it really is just a short trail. Near the trailhead, there is a bridge over a small creek, and as we were talking, I looked over to the bridge, and for a split second, I thought I saw something standing on it. I swear it was the same size as a human, but the head was shaped like a German shepherd's. However, when I blinked, it was gone. I was willing to believe that my eyes were playing tricks on me, and I laughed it off, telling my sister what my dumb brain had thought I'd seen. And that's when she confided in me about what had made her jump earlier. While we were eating, she says that she had indeed thought she saw something crawling on her. But it wasn't a bug like I assumed. According to her, what had been crawling on her was a small brown rodent. But it disappeared when she jumped, and of course I had not seen it myself. Yet neither of us had seen anything crawl away. So she assumed it was just her imagination. Now here's the really weird part. About a week after this, we decided to go back and walk the trail again. But this time we brought a friend with us. It was one of those friends who had not been on the trail before, or even knew that it existed. As we were walking, we did recount our strange sightings to them, still laughing about our silly imaginations. None of us thought more of it than that, and it was a pretty normal walk around the loop until we got close to the end of the trail. My friend suddenly said to us, "Oh look," really excitedly. I had assumed she was looking at someone with a dog, but then she paused and looked really confused, so I had to ask her about it. She swears off to the side of the trail she had seen a raccoon or something, but it had stood up onto its back legs to stare at us for a moment as we walked by. But just like with our sightings, it was gone the moment she blinked. I don't know what to make of these experiences. The path suddenly feeling wrong is weird enough because it keeps happening, but these sightings really take the cake. What are the odds we would all see something for only the span of a blink, and each of us seeing something different and creepy? Pretty weird, I have to admit. It does creep me out a bit. I'm not exactly comfortable on that trail anymore. I'd rather believe we all have vivid imaginations, but every time my sister and I go back to the trail, I can't help the nagging wonder if there really is something strange happening there. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode of Darkness Prevails. I hope these thrills and chills gave you the satisfaction you were looking for, you freaks. If you've got a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. If you want to support the show, check the links below, where you can donate to my Patreon, or get some of my merchandise. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode, about 7 creatures seen by 4chan users. Brandon Rowland says, "We get it with the freaking monster stories already. Can't we have some more Walmart, KFC, McDonald's stories like the old days? I'm sick of stupid Skinwalker and Wendigos." Brandon, I'm simply doing what people want, and what I have fun doing. Believe it or not, despite my most popular videos being about McDonald's and whatnot, nowadays the videos that get the most consistent views from my audience are about supernatural creatures, paranormal encounters, and weirdness in the woods, and that happens to be what I enjoy reading the most. Now I always go back to old topics. That's why my stories are always an assortment of different topics. In fact, the video you didn't even watch before you left that comment contained stories about aliens, sinister entities, and real-life cryptids like the ground sloth. It's not all skinwalkers and wendigos. There are entire worlds of mythological creatures and ghouls and ghosts, and I want to hear about it. But again, I always cover a variety of topics. I nearly always have videos about people-on-people encounters, glitches in the Matrix, haunted objects and places, etc. But if you don't have the patience to wait for those stories, or you just don't like the majority of what I do, my channel isn't for you. Sorry, Brandon. Galaxy Doggo says, "Hey Darkness, you've helped me through the past few weeks while dealing through a rough breakup. Thank you. I'm glad I could be of any help at all. A lot of people use shows like mine to get them through rough patches. So if you're ever in a down mood, always come back for some joyous spooks." IGO-Hit-Zenine says, "You can find all these creatures in the ghetto past 12. Guess I'll start getting my late night McDouble at 11:30 then." Katie Salgado says, "My eyes are so tired that I read Monster-chan from the thumbnail." Aw, that's cute. I want a Monster-chan. And Julian Pett says, "Dirt bike ride stories." That's a great idea. Hopefully I can get enough stories on that topic. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are on the way. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.